2 weeks, 19,000 kilometres. 3 red and white Holden VB Commodores carving a dusty signature across the continent, while the rest of the field tried to survive a rally designed to break cars, crews and reputations. In August 1979, the Repco Round Australia Trial set off from Melbourne Showgrounds and headed into the wild heart of the Australian outback. It would return a fortnight later with a result so dominant it launched the new Holden Commodore and reshaped the folklore of Australian motorsport. And right in the middle of it all was Peter Brock, a supposed publicity pick who turned the most brutal reliability trial of the modern age into his proudest victory. The Repco trial was revival and reckoning in one. Australia's greatest round continent epics of the 1950s had faded into legend, but Repco's 1979 reboot brought the spirit back with intent. The numbers alone were frightening. Roughly 19,000 kilometres in 14 days, 134 competitive stages on mixed tarmac and gravel, and a field of 167 crews. Only 92 would be classified finishers, and just 13 would compete every last control without skipping sections. The route ran anti-clockwise, Melbourne through South Australia and across the Nullarbor to Perth, then up the West Australian coast to Darwin, down the top end, and east through Queensland, south through New South Wales, and home back again to Victoria. It was a monster of logistics and endurance, made darker by the fact that 2 competitors were killed when their car rolled near Kununurra. Reliability trial sounded clinical, but in the dust, it meant survival. From the start, the organised aim was plain: build an event hard enough to separate preparation and discipline from bravado. Colin Bond, then managing Ford's late organised Rothmans back Cortina squad, warned before a wheel had turned that the Repco would be the roughest rally ever held in the country, and it would certainly be no picnic. It was a line equal parts sales pitch and prophecy. The stages were long and punishing. One Kimberley section alone stretched over 500 kilometres of all gravel, and on some transcontinental hauls, crews drove for up to 2 days with only snatches of rest. The design intent was to pound cars to breaking point, while rewarding the cool heads that treated speed as a resource to be rationed, not flaunted. If the Holden Dealer Team looked formidable on paper, it was because George Shepard built a program whose strength was invisible as much as visible. The new VB Commodore was Australia's fresh face showroom car. The Repco would be its trial by fire. Shepard rejected the glamour of a V8, choosing the lighter 3.3 litre straight 6 straight out of the Tirana XU1 to preserve front end life and reduce fuel weight. Then he filled the boots with enormous long-range tanks on the order of 180 litres plus, rearranged the rear seats to carry spares without upsetting weight, balance, and spent months proving components in a silver test track hack called Old Silver. Bridgestone even tailored tyres to the program. By the time the 3 Commodores rolled out of Melbourne, they looked neat rather than spectacular, but that was the point. The driver roster blended fame with rally expertise. Car 05 paired Brock with co-driver Matt Phillip and navigator Noel Richards. A second Commodore crewed rally aces Barry Ferguson and Wayne Bell with Dave Boddy. The third car put international endurance masters Shekhar Mehta and Runo Aaltonen alongside Australian journalist Barry Lake. Publicity with pace. It was a lineup built to win outright and to manage the uncontrollables that a fortnight in the bush would throw at them. Not everyone bought the logic of having Brock in the mix. The touring car superstar was, to skeptics, a corporate flourish to give TV cameras a reason to look in Holden's direction while the real rallymen got on with the job. Even some within Holden fretted that the front page name might complicate the carefully plotted narrative. Brock heard it all. Later he'd call the Repco his proudest achievement precisely because he'd been painted as a PR exercise before he'd even cracked a stage note. And as John Crennan would later recall decades on, there were even discussions inside Holden about handicapping Brock mid-event, measures that never took hold, but speak to the nerves around a campaign that was bigger than one driver. The cynics didn't know, or chose to overlook, that Brock had serious dirt cred from rallycross, and that he'd been immersed in the Commodore development miles from the start. Once the flag dropped, perception would have to be earned. Ford's answer was wonderfully old school. 3 six-cylinder Cortina TEs, strong, simple, and bristling with the sort of bush-ready modifications Bond and his engineers thought the event demanded. The team might have been late to the party. Preparations only truly bit in 6 weeks before the start of the event, with a budget less than a third of Holden's. But the driving strength was undeniable. Bond himself, Greg Carr, and George Fury. All Australian rally champions with navigators who knew how to keep a car alive at 9/10 for days. If any crew could outfox Holden's reliability calculus by simply being relentlessly fast, it was the Blue Oval Brigade. The early days were a sorting hat, from Melbourne across South Australia and out onto the Nullarbor. The surface switched between fast, tyre-shredding gravel and tarmac, with long transports hiding nasty sting-in-the-tail stages. The gentleman's agreement among the elite was to run within themselves, but within is relative when the clock never stops. Brock's 05 settled into the top 5, surviving an off near William Creek, while the Ford Cortinas showed enough speed to rumble the Commodores. Evidently, the race was on. By the time the trial reached Perth, Bond's Cortina led the field. Holden looked prepared, Ford looked fast. It was precisely the dynamic the Repco's route designers intended to expose. Which philosophy would bend first? The answer came brutally quick. Rolling out of pre-dawn for the long Division W haul from Perth towards Geraldton, Port Hedland and the top end, the Ford camp was hit by a chain of misfortunes. Bond himself rolled on a transport. Fury's car broke engine mounts on the very first trial stage. In the space of hours, the fleet that had set the pace to Perth was on the back foot repairing, nursing and calculating. The sheer speed that had put Ford in front was suddenly the luxury they no longer had. It's worth pausing here, because the fastest combination prior to that accident claim, often traded in pub talk, deserves clarity. The hard fact is that Bond led into Perth, which in a trial this long is less about one hot stage and more about cumulative pace and discipline. If you want to call anyone faster to Perth, you're talking about the Bond Cortina. The trick is that the Repco rewarded fast enough. In the vast emptiness of north of Perth, the maths changed on Ford. With Ford wounded, Holden's meticulously engineered rhythm came to the fore. Across Western Australia and into the Kimberley, on those mammoth gravel blasts where a single mistake could turn a perfect run into wreckage, the Commodores absorbed the terrain. By Port Hedland, they'd carved out a commanding 1-2-3, and crucially, were still in one piece. From Darwin onwards, the race narrowed to an internal HDT duel, Brock vs Ferguson, with the international car of Mehta and Aaltonen a step behind, but still very much alive in the fight. The brutality of the design never let up. Crews lived on catnaps and checkpoint food. Even the roadbook was a weapon. Navigators knit the country together by numbers, while drivers hunted a pace their car could repeat indefinitely. The trial's managers had thrown in everything: sand, bull dust, flood-cut creeks, corrugations deep enough to loosen fillings. The 516-kilometre Kimberley stage wasn't an outliner, it was a statement. The result is why the 1979 event is remembered, with reason, as the hardest long-distance rally of the modern era in Australia. Meanwhile, the publicity pick was answering his critics the only way that mattered. Brock's strengths, mechanical sympathy, relentlessly neat car placement, and an ability to drive under the car's pain threshold for hours were exactly what the Repco asked for. He'd prepared too, with miles and miles in old silver, learning that what the Commodore would accept and what it would punish. Holden's choice of a 6-cylinder engine proved inspired, lighter over the nose, less thirsty, easier on front suspension and brakes. The cars ran big tanks and carried spares smartly, minimising the chaos of roadside fixes. All of that translated into fewer unplanned stops, fewer mistakes under fatigue, fewer self-inflicted wounds. And yet there was real racing in the middle of the management. After Mount Isa, Ferguson put in a flyer, beating Brock by 4 minutes on a key stage and edging ahead by a minute into Townsville. The idea of Brock as a sheltered corporate figure became impossible to sustain once the timesheets showed the internal HDT fight was alive. Out on the stages, there was nothing soft about how the Commodores were being driven. What changed in Queensland was not the speed, but the strategy. Preservation mattered more than point scoring. Team orders came next. To protect the clean sweep that was now in sight, HDT placed a lid on inter-team skirmishing and told its 3 crews to hold formation to Victoria. It was pragmatic and, for purists, a little deflating. But then, this was a reliability trial, not a 5-lap sprint. When you've fought the country for 12 days, you don't roll the dice to settle an argument in the last 24 hours. Brock, Phillip and Richards would be the winners. Ferguson, Bell, Boddy second, and Mehta, Aaltonen and Lake third. A crushing Commodore 1-2-3, marketing gold, but really hardly earned the hard way. None of that is to deny the whispers and what ifs. Wayne Bell has recalled being benched for driving duties late in the event, an unpopular decision inside a popular result. There were also stories remembered later by Holden insiders of management briefly considering ways to handicap Brock mid-rally to avoid a narrative they didn't control. Whether you file these under politics or prudence, they speak to the stakes. Repco wasn't just a rally, it was a national stage on which Holden launched the Commodore to Australia. The cameras were always going to find car 05. The credit Brock earned is that, when the lenses zoomed in, he made the story about execution. Outside of the Holden Ford Theatre, there were performances worth savouring. Ross Dunkerton, partnered by journalists Peter Mackay and Jeff Jones in a Volvo 244 GT, hustled the big Swede to 4th outright, a remarkable mix of speed, restraint and indestructibility. Toyota's Wes Nolder brought a Celica home in 6th. Porsche split the front drive and family sedan brigade, with Edgar Herman's 911 Carrera 8th and the 924 of Jürgen Barth and Roland Kussmaul 9th. And Ford did salvage pride. Greg Carr nursed a Cortina to 5th after the Perth carnage. In a fortnight where nearly half the field failed to finish, these were victories that didn't fit onto podium steps. Even the results sheets carries the scars. Collation errors and post-event corrections mean historians still argue minutes here and there, most infamously the 29-minute error in Ross Dunkerton's final tally, later noted by researchers. That the debate persists 45 years on underscores what the Repco rally really was, a test so large that even the paperwork bent under the strain. The only item no one disputes is the order at the front. Brock first, Ferguson second, Mehta third. A Holden clean sweep. When the 3 Commodores rolled back into the showgrounds on the 19th of August, the pictures told the story. A brand new model proving itself the hard way, a race driver answering a rally's exam, and a team whose quiet obsession with detail trumped a faster but less durable assault. Brock had survived the terrain, the schedule, the expectation, and the doubt. He'd also quietly, decisively answered the publicity stunt line by doing the least theatrical thing in motorsport. He didn't put a wheel wrong when it mattered. For the record keepers among you, the official ledger shows Brock Phillips first, Ferguson Bell second, and Mehta Aaltonen third. Only 13 cars did every control, 92 were classified as finishers. The Repco would return again in 1995, and when it did, Holden won again. But in 1979, it stands alone because of what it proved. That a modern showroom car could be engineered to survive the worst 2-week test this country could invent, and that a touring car icon could master the bush by thinking like a rally artist. If that felt like a stunt at the start, it looked like a masterclass at the end. Before we close, a contemporary voice from the start line to frame what you've just heard. Colin Bond, speaking as Ford's team manager on the eve of the event, said that this was probably the roughest rally ever held, not a picnic. And he was right. And the crew that best respected that truth, the Holden Dealer Team's trio of Commodores, took everything Australia threw at them and came home in perfect formation. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode of the Racing Chronicles. We've got plenty more stories coming your way, so stay tuned for the next chapter in racing history. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.